one of the things that comes back to me is I remember in my in the first adventure, Adventureland, there was a bear. And I remember in my original version of the game, the bear fell off the ledge and died. And you get down on the bottom of the ledge and you find a dead bear. And I either got a letter or somebody talking to me saying, you know, that really put me off to find out I killed that bear while I was playing this. Why did you make me kill the bear? And so I redid the game and put in a slightly woozy, stunned bear down at the bottom. And then after that, I did not want to put the player in a situation where they were feeling uncomfortable playing the game. And so that is where I went with it. Now, there were some violent instances. The whole purpose of the count, that game had a goal, and the goal was to kill the vampire. But along the way, nobody else was getting killed at the same time. So it was a definite evil. It was the ultimate monster, and it was okay. You were wiping out the monster. No innocent bears were being harmed. There's an interesting thing about the bear in Adventureland. The way I wrote the first adventure was I would have, because of tightness of space, I'd have English words that were only using the first 3 letters. So in the interpreter, if you wanted to yell at the bear, or you could scream at the bear, you can do, holler at the bear. These were all ways to startle the bear to get him fall off the ledge, so you get him out of the way. I'd use 3 letters, so I'd have HOL, I'd have SCR, I'd have YEL as the verb that I wanted you to use on the bear. Well, I got a letter a few years later, and it was kind of funny. They said, we're playing with the bear, and we got so upset with it. We tried to push the bear. We tried to tickle the bear. We tried to do everything with that bear, and finally we just said, screw bear. Game replies, bear is so startled he falls off the ledge. And it was one of the drawbacks of short English words. And one very good niche market that I see for interactive fiction and adventure games that tends to get overlooked is for the visually impaired players. My last game, I deliberately put in a section of the game that allows a blind player to play it. It's screen scraper friendly, so that it would read out loud the game to them and allow them to play. And that was done because I was approached by blind players asking me to do that. And I thought that's a wonderful thing. And it really, really is a great media. Because for them, sight is not important, but the sound and the game is all in their mind. And they can actually play the games that way. So that was kind of an eye-opener for me to make me think about the necessity of doing that.
Did you ever actually find yourself playing your old game?
No, not really, because when I knew them, there was no need to play it. You think about it, most adventures are a single playthrough, just the nature of the beast. If you already know all the solutions, there's really nothing there to go back to redo. So there wasn't much of a need of it.
Okay.
And I tend to look more forward and very little backwards, so I don't reflect on the past that much. I'm always looking forward to the future, see what's coming. What I did with every one of my games in the series was every time I wrote a new game, I always tried to do something different that stretched the boundary from what I did from the first game. First game was Find Treasures. The second game was Pirate's Adventure, and there were only 2 treasures in that game, and it was more you got to get something done before something happens to build up. There were steps in it. You have the first puzzle in the main room, then the pirate's island, then building the ship, and so forth. When I got to the third game, there were no treasures whatsoever in that game. There, you just had to accomplish something. And this went on and on. Probably my last major game that I did was when I was doing a tie-in with Marvel Comics, and I was doing the Fantastic Four. And in that game, you actually controlled 2 separate characters at different times that you could switch back and forth. And you needed to control both characters to complete the game. So, like I said, every game had something that I would push the envelope. And my interpreter kept growing because of it, because I was doing things I hadn't thought of doing in earlier games. Marvel, I'm pretty sure, approached us because they were looking to do tie-ins. It was Jim The vice president at the time was Joe Calamari, that was his name, and he approached us. He was really trying to expand the Marvel brand with games, toys, and all sorts of things, and he picked us as the computer gaming tie-in that they wanted to go with, because they liked what they had done, what we did with our catalogs. We were well known in the industry, and we were going pretty far afield. I loved working with the Marvel people. That was a real honor. Got to meet Jim Shooter. He was the editor at that time, Joe Calamari, and just their whole creative staff, and we had a very good relationship during this time. So I really enjoyed that. When we put together this deal where we were going to do this set of adventures, not just one, I got them to give me a subscription to every single comic that they were making at that time. And I'd literally get 80, 90 comics coming in each month, and I read them all. Also, this was the first iteration of what was known as the Marvel Universe. This was their series of comics that would tie together all their characters and give a history and try to make everything logical. They hadn't released it yet. They're in the process of releasing it, but they gave me the pre-release scripts of it. I had the rights, basically, to take any character in the Marvel Universe, to use any characters, and do anything with them I wanted. And there was also going to be a tie-in of a comic book series that went with it. Both the comic book and the games were totally my creation. I came up with what I wanted to do, and the comic book I did it as an outline, simple text outline of what it was, and then they gave it to their creative people, and they made the comic out of it. And then the games I did as a tie-in. And both the game and the tie-in were both deliberately tied in to be together. You'd actually read the comic, and there'd be a section there where it made sense that the game existed, and that you had to play the game to find out what happened in this part of the comic, because it wasn't going on. I was very, very proud of it. I came up with a name for the series. It was called Quest Probe, and that was just the name that I drew out of the air, and I had a lot of fun with it. I have hundreds upon hundreds, probably 1,000 fan emails. People writing me, telling me how much my games affected them, things that it did for them, what it was like, why my games really touched them. And so back in 2000, I came up with the idea of releasing another game, which was basically taking Return to Pirates Island, which was only put out originally for the TI cartridge, which was very short term, and that was a very special game at its time. I put that game out, and so I decided to up its interpreter base to be a full-fledged, full-sentence interpreter, and re-release the game with more puzzles, and that's what I did. And that was my last release of a game, and it went over well. It was fun, but I just not been doing that much. I've got another game that I've got the preliminaries done, and the opening setup. Probably I'd say maybe 10% of the game is where I like it. It's called The Inheritance, but I haven't been working on it that much. I find now to play more games than I do write more games. Part of the problem was back when I was starting my company, one of the reasons I was writing games is there weren't any to play, and I wanted to play games. I remember when Wizardry first came out for the Apple. Knocked my productivity off for a whole couple of weeks because all I was doing was playing Wizardry. I just loved that game. I'm a game player besides being a game writer. Came up with my design and made a graphics. This was monochrome, and just I don't even remember what the resolution was. This is pretty small. But anyway, made it so that two players, and I made two controls, could then fight each other in a tank war arcade style game. So each progressive increment was like, wow, this is so much cooler. And now I'm running with these incredible LCD computers. I've got more horsepower here sitting under my desk than the original Cray supercomputer, which is totally mind-boggling. It's just amazing where the technology has gone to. I like working with cutting-edge technologies. I program in C#. I use .NET. I don't like getting myself stuck where it's like, oh, I've always done it this way, and this is the way I'll always do it. I like learning new things. I like trying new things, which is one of the reasons that I'm enjoying all these new games and new things that come out. I've got an Xbox 360. I really enjoy that. First first time I've ever had a game console that I actually enjoy as much as a PC, and I'm very impressed with the game writers of today and the things they're coming up with. It's a fun time to be able to play. Part of the thing, though, is things like MOGs, EverQuest, whatnot, tend to be time sinks. And it's very easy to get into a situation where you're putting too much time into something that should only be a small part of your life. And I can see that a lot. I've had guildmates that have literally invested their life into the game, and that was not good. And I've helped folks get out of playing games. Some of them had to cut cold turkey because they're spending too much time in it. But as a hobby, it can be a lot of fun. So, and we also did Buckaroo Banzai too.
Right. I think you had 20 that you did about? Something in that range.
I'll be honest, 12, 13, 14, 15 maybe.
Okay.
Maybe 15 in a series.
Okay.
And of those, I didn't do them all totally. There was Pyramid of Doom, which I was kind of amazed with. That was Alvin Files who did that. I had published 7 adventures. Pyramid of Doom, the 8th adventure in the series, I did not write. A fellow submitted it to me. Now you've got to realize that my game at this point was written in a machine language. It was running on a TRS-80. He went into the machine language, decoded it, and then he looked at the language that it was reading, because like I said, I invented my own adventure language, which then I had a compiler that compiled that adventure language into a database that went into the game. Well, he was interested enough to take this whole thing apart and then figure it out and write his own game in it, his own adventure, which was Pyramid of Doom. And so I worked with him with minor editing on that game, and then we ended up publishing it for him. I never met Alvin, but I have had some email contact with him later on. I was wondering, what sort of person does this? He must be a great computer programmer. He's a lawyer, of all things, but he's got an incredible mind. So that was very impressive. Frequently what I would do is after I got past the first 1 or 2 games and I realized what I was doing and I started to put it together, my first thing was to come up with a theme. What is it the theme of the adventure is going to be? Whether it was Dracula, outer space, ghost town, whatever. I come up with a theme. Next, I would decide what was the goal of the adventure. Was I simply going to be having a treasure hunt, or was there an ultimate goal that the player I wanted them to complete? Once I had that, I would then populate rooms, places for the adventure to be in. Once I had places for them to be in, I started putting items in the room. Just randomly, not randomly, I'd put in items that would fit the room. Once I had items in the room, then I started thinking of puzzles to do with the items. How can they manipulate the items? What can they do with these items? What do they need to do with these items? And that's how I would build the adventure. The story and the adventure and the puzzles all came together as one. It was being written as I did it. And the ultimate backstory might be in there, like Quest Probe is a good example, because this was a series of adventures that was tying together for an ultimate ending. But in general, the adventures would flow. I did not storyboard them. I did not write them out. My storyboard was my adventure language, and I would put things in it. I would also do things with alpha testing with friends and colleagues to come in. I'd have a game framework laid out, and I'd let them start playing with it. And then I'd see, what do they do with this environment that I've given them? I've given them an environment to react in. They're going to react in ways I didn't think of, and that gave me ideas. Oh, yeah, they could do that with that item now. If I do that, I can make a puzzle out of it going this way. And that was very, very effective. I found my alpha testing would give me a good 30 or 40% of my ideas, just watching how people interfaced. Sierra Online originally did that. We had a interesting tie-in with Williams. He originally worked for us as one of our salesmen for Adventure International. He's a freelance salesman on the West Coast until his wife Roberta came up to him and said, you know, I think I can write one of these games. And that was the beginning of Sierra Online. I remember when that happened. In any case, yeah, our niche was more the two-word adventure games. At one point we went more into the graphics mode. Some of the adventures that we brought out on the Atari 800, not the 800, the ST. The Atari ST had some fantastic graphics for its time. The Texas Instruments, we did something that was very unique there. I keep saying we, but really I was the creative force and I was the one doing this. Was on the TI 99.4, we had our regular games, the text games, available as cassette tapes. You put in a cartridge that was the interpreter and it read the cassette tape in, and you had your game. Well, then we did Return to Pirates Island. I had 2 or 3 graphic artists working with me, designing the Return to Pirates Island game so that the entire adventure would fit in the cartridge and be not only the full adventure, but also have full graphics available to it. And in that I had to come up with a special way to compress the graphics. Instead of using a compression format, what we used was a sort of a bits and pieces type approach, where every picture, if you look at it very closely, is made up of all these little tiny puzzle pieces that were available to the graphics artist that he can then put together in unique ways throughout the game. We never went to the, well, I won't say never. I started coming out with the SAGA Plus interpreter that was both graphics and full sentence interpreter about the time that the company went out of business. And it was that basic technology that I later dusted off and cleaned up and did a lot of work to. That was my Return to Pirates Island 2. On my Return to Pirates Island 2, if anybody ever plays it, I have a very sophisticated help system built into the game. And I've never had anyone come to me who has said, I'm stuck on the game. So I was very satisfied with what I did there, where the game itself gives you levels of help, so you can figure out what's going on, get a little tiny hint, get a little bigger hint, or finally get a full solution. No, the biggest confusion I get nowadays is, you write Dilbert, don't you? That's a different Scott Adams. And actually in the earlier days of the internet, Scott was putting out a newsletter. And in it he said, there's another Scott Adams out there that wrote adventure games way back in the dawn of history. And if anybody knows him, please let me know, because I'm getting a bunch of his mail. And he was getting my fan mail. I still get his fan mail, so it's funny. I've corresponded a few times with him, and he's a great guy. But other than that, no. The people, Adventure International, made adventure games. We actually had a business line. We even went into statistics. We tried a few other things, but none of them really ever panned out very well. Other than Chris. Chris was the cash register inventory system we sold, and the only reason it did so well was I actually wrote that for my computer stores. At the same time I had Adventure International, I had a chain of 3, I think, computer stores in the Orlando area. This was before the big franchise computer stores ever existed, so mom and pa type computer stores. And I needed some way to keep track of my salesmen's commissions, because I had them on commissions in the store, and there wasn't really anything out there. So I wrote a cash register inventory system that ran on an Atari 800 with a cash drawer, and that was what we used. And then I realized this thing might be sellable, and I turned around and put it in the catalog, and you'll see it in the old AI catalogs. It's in there. And we sold quite a few copies to other stores. And one of the problems with running your own business is you also are running your own problems, and it's nice being able to sleep at night and not worrying about things. Ultimately, what happened to Adventure International is my fault. I was the president of the company, and I made ultimate decisions. I'm sure I listened to some bad advice. I probably did not choose the best people to be working with me in all areas, but ultimately the blame was all mine for the ultimate problems we had. What basically happened, since we're talking about that, was our pockets were not deep. We were not a public company. We had no outside money, and we were just totally funded internally and with our growth. We hit a bad downturn in sales where we accepted some orders that were exceptionally large from a company that we filled, and they did not sell through, and they returned the merchandise, which left us with a lot of manufacturing costs because they didn't meet their deals. Also, remember the time that the TI-99-4 went from being a $1,000 computer to a $50 computer when they were closing it out. There was a big downturn in the industry at that time. We didn't have the pockets to survive it. We didn't have any outside investors, and that was basically a downhill slide at that point. Also, we had sold out some of our lines to Commodore Computer. They were actually publishing our Marvel lines, and they did really a very poor job of it, and they were unable to meet their commitments to us on what they had promised. Fortunately, it was in a three-way contract with them, Marvel, and ourselves, and at least they were able to, we got some of the penalty money out of them, but it was nowhere near what they had promised to do. So that hurt us. All right. And without funding to ride the bumps, it's pretty bad. So do I miss having the company? Certainly, it was a fun time, but it had a lot of hassles and heartaches. And is it something I'd like to do again? I have to say probably not, because of the hassles and heartaches. So Broderbund, just like Sierra, was an offshoot of Adventure International, because Doug was one of our original authors. He was my original outside author. When I was publishing adventure games, he sent in a space commerce game. I can't remember the name of it. Space Empire, Galactic Empire, that he wrote. It was a marvelous piece of work that I agreed to publish, and that's where I came up with the idea of Adventure International actually accepting outside games besides just the games I was writing. And I had a large stable of other people's games that I was selling, if you go through the catalog, and these were all authors that were on a royalty basis, which was probably one of the mistakes I made, because our royalties were extremely liberal and very good for the author side. We were paying as high as 20% of the retail price, not the wholesale, the retail. That means they were getting a good 50 to 60% of the total profits of the game going to the author, which is something that would never happen in today's world, unless you're like a Tom Clancy writing books. But anyway, Doug was our first author, Doug Carlson, and he then, I remember seeing him at the San Francisco Computer Fair, where he was there with his brother and his aunt, and they had a small tiny booth. We had our big booth, and they decided they were going to basically spin off. He borrowed money from his aunt to start the company, and he started Broderbund, and they did very well for quite a long time. And of course their fortunes also changed later on. Yeah. And there were a lot of these early companies that ended up, like you said, on the bear shields. The Preppy was a very interesting game. This was one of our first real arcade games that we got into, that we produced in-house. I had a fellow working for me, a very, very talented young man by the name of Russ Wetmore, and he said he wanted to write a game, and he wanted my permission to go ahead and write a game at this point. And I said, okay, go for it. What are you going to write? He wanted to do this on his own idea, whatever he was going to come up with. At this time, we were flush, we were doing very well, and I thought, okay, let's see what he can happen. And he went to the arcades, and he came back and he said, I'm going to write Frogger. I said, well, you can't write Frogger. That's a trademark, and it's a big arcade game. We can't do Frogger. We don't have the license to it. We'd be in a lot of trouble. He says, that's okay. I got an idea. And he came up with Preppy. If you look at Preppy, it's the look and feel of Frogger, but it's a totally different thing. You have this Preppy crossing the road trying not to get run over type thing to get his golf balls that he hit on the other side. For a long time there, we were kind of concerned we were going to get sued, because the people who did Frogger did not come out with a version of Frogger for the Atari 400, 800 series. And so everybody who ever wanted to play Frogger on the Atari had to buy Preppy. Really. People were literally going into the stores wanting to buy Frogger, but all that was available was Preppy, and so they bought it. So it was kind of special there. We won an award for that game. Believe it or not, the company won very few awards. Personally, I've never won any awards or anything like that. But there was one year that Preppy won Game of the Year. That was awarded to it. And Russ went out there to accept the prize because he was the author. And he talked to people who owned the license to Frogger. And he basically went up to him and said, "Are you going to sue us?" And they said, no, we've talked about it. We decided we're not going to. And that was a close deal. Yeah, Adventure International was definitely responsible for a lot of the creativity spawn in the industry. That it touched on a number of the people. Obviously, we didn't have a monopoly on it, but since we were the first company, we were very visible.
Right.
Literally, we were the first, as far as I know in the world, first computer gaming company that was selling computer games primarily. That was it. That was what we were doing. We were selling computer games, and we were doing it to a mass market. I still remember the very first order we ever got, for other than individual orders. I had put an ad in a magazine called, I think it was Softside, it's been a while now, where I was selling the Adventureland game. I got a call from a Radio Shack manager in Chicago. Keep in mind I was living down in the Orlando area, and he wanted to buy, I think it was 50 copies of Adventureland. And I said, actually my wife at the time talked to him, and she was all set to sell to him, and he wanted a price, and she quoted him 50 times the retail price, and he had to explain wholesale and how wholesale works and how he's supposed to get a discount so he could then sell it at retail. This is how new we were to what we were doing. So we got an order for 50 copies, and literally I had to hand make each cassette by hand. We shipped all the cassettes the same way we would the retail, with a little sheet of paper and the 50 cassettes to him, and he got it, and he says, "Where's the packaging?" "Oh, packaging? What's packaging?" He says, "You guys, it's okay. I moved these at a computer club meeting. They're all gone already. I need another 50, but I need packaging."
You got to come up with
He said, "We need packaging for these games." And I said, "Packaging? Oh, we've got to put packaging in this? How are we going to do that?" "Okay, this is a problem. I've got a cassette tape. I don't have a lot of money right now. Keep in mind, I was working for a living, and I was doing this on the side. How am I going to come up with packaging? Okay, let me see. Let me see what plastic bags are." So I went to commercial bag makers, and I could buy 10,000 bags for, nominal fee of $200 or $300. And it's like, what? I don't need 10,000 bags. I don't got $200 or $300 to invest into this. What am I going to do? At this time, my daughter, my oldest daughter now, was a baby, and she was drinking from bottles. And there was something back then called it was a shell of a bottle, and inside you put a baby bottle liner, and you put the formula in, put the lid on. So when you got done, you threw away the liner. There was no bottles to wash. It was very hygienic. You didn't have to boil. Well, I took one of these baby bottle liners, just looking at it, and I dropped a cassette tape into it, and it fit. And I was, oh, I'm onto something here. The top. I came up with the idea of a business card, a folding business card, that would then go over the top and be stapled. And I had the package. And then on the front, I had the business cards printed at a local printer fairly cheaply. I could do like 100 cards at a time. It had the Adventure International information on the front and the synopsis of the game on the back. I had a cassette label that went on the cassette. I don't remember if the labels were printed or I did them on my printer at the time. And there was my packaging. Oh, and drilled a hole through the card so it would hang on a pegboard. And that was the packaging. We had furniture stores ordering for us. At this time, this was the dawn of the computer, appliance computers, and a lot of retailers were sort of experimenting. I think we had a grocery store at one point. One of our better clients, I think, was primarily an Asian grocery with a side of computers on, shall we say, computer software. It was I don't remember the name very well. Sorry, but it was anybody who wanted to buy wholesale could be a distributor of our game. I mean, not a distributor, could be a retail market. We'd sell wholesale if they bought a large enough quantity. Then also the distributors started getting into it, where you'd have a middleman that would buy, and then the smaller companies would buy from them. So we tried to structure our discount to give them a break, to make it worthwhile for them to sell through to other stores, which was probably one of the problems that led to our downfall later, because one of the large distributors just over-ordered, and we got stuck with product.
Right.
I did a guest lecture for a university here in Wisconsin, and went in and had a very good time with them. As part of it, they set up for the following year to teach a course that required the students to actually learn how my new interpreter works and come up with the manuals for it, which was kind of interesting. But the concept of showing somebody how I wrote adventures and how I developed them, no. But my games have actually been used in teaching situations. I remember back in its heyday, Adventure got a letter from a professor at University of Miami that was using my game as a basis for an economics course of all things. So it's just amazing how these things were touching folks. Every puzzle was designed for the game at that time. I didn't have a whole bunch of, oh, this is a great puzzle, I'll save it for some time in the future. I always just came up with the puzzles that fit where I was. I've forgotten a lot of the puzzles. I'm sure if I went to play the games today, I'd be stumped myself and it would take me a while to play through them. Just the nature of forgetting and not doing it. There was a time where I could walk somebody through every game in every one of my series without any problem. I mean, I could sit there and play it verbally with somebody. Like, if you think about it, adventure games can be played verbally. I could say, you're in a forest, there are trees here, tell me what to do. And you reply, and then I would reply just what the game would. I knew them that intimately. That unfortunately is no longer the case. Marvel, I had a lot of fun with, because I was working with the Marvel Comics people, and being able to do a comic book tie-in, to me was just incredible. I got to write a comic book. They illustrated it, they put the dialogue in, but I wrote that comic book. That was great. When I got the Atari St Graphics working, they were just phenomenal what I was able to do on that, being able to work with hardware. I remember when the PC first came out, and it had horrible, horrible colors. You had a two-color palette that was just totally disgusting, which is unfortunate because now my games live on mostly as PC-compatible versions, and people say, where are the graphics ones? Well, unfortunately, the graphics for the IBM were horrible. I wrote a game that I never sold, that I was very proud of, and that was called Sapphire. It was for the Atari, and it was an arcade game. You played a fireman who went into a burning building and had to rescue these gems that you picked up. It was written as an arcade game. I did it as a proof of concept because I wanted to learn the fourth FORTH computer language, and so I wrote this game entirely in that language. And you, as a fireman, you had a hose that you carried with you and connected to your main water source. You were putting out fires as you go. The fire could cut across your hose and burn it. You would find fire extinguishers that you could pick up and take with to do spot fire removals as you tried to reconnect your hose. Multiple levels, you'd kick down doors. I was really very proud of that game, and it's history now. Nobody, except for a few friends that and colleagues at AI, saw it. I never completed it and never sold it, but it was one I was very proud of, which is an interesting side note. I was working at Stromberg Carlson down in just outside of Orlando, and they had a DEC mainframe there. And one of the guys in the IT department said, hey, we got a really neat game on the mainframe that we've been playing, and you might want to take a look at it. And it was Colossal Caves. So I got permission to get onto the game. I would come in every morning before work for an hour or two, and then I would stay for an hour after work so I could play the game. And I played it for about a week, and I was just blown away by it. It was a lot of fun. This was about the same time that I had gotten my first appliance computer. To me, an appliance computer was one I didn't have to build from a kit, which was kind of unique. And it was a TRS-80 Model 1. Before that, I had a Sphere computer. It was their very first order. And before that, a bit slice that my brother put together. Anyway, back to the TRS-80. It was like, wow, this adventure game was really fun. I've been trying to think of a good game to write on my TRS-80, and I want to do something in BASIC that uses strings, because I had just learned BASIC. I'd been a machine language programmer, a Fortran programmer, a COBOL programmer, and BASIC had something very unique that I had never seen before in a computer language, and that was strings, the ability to manipulate English words. And I really wanted to write a game that did something like that, and I was trying to think of an idea to do it. Adventure seemed, wow, this is perfect. The fellows in the IDT department said, well, you want to take a look at the source code for this game? I said, no, I'm not really interested in that. I just like the concept. They said, well, this thing runs on the mainframe. There's no way you're going to get it into a 16K TRS-80 Model 1. It isn't going to happen. I said, that's okay. I don't care. I'm going to write a game that's a similar concept, and I'm going to start from the ground up. And what I did was I started with an interpreter, writing the interpreter for my own adventure language, and went from there. And I was able to get the interpreter start running, and then the next step was, okay, I've got idea of a game, what am I going to do? Well, let me start making some rooms in the game and start putting things in the rooms and see what happens, see where my imagination goes. And that was Adventureland. This was back in 1978, and that's where it all started. The idea behind Adventureland was it was going to be some sort of fantasy adventure where you were off collecting treasures, storing them away, and you would complete the game by finally collecting all the treasures in the proper spot. And I just added to it piecemeal as I went along. I had a forest. Okay, what does the forest have? Oh, got to have a tree. So put the tree in the forest. Off of the forest, the first room then became a meadow. Okay, what are we going to put in the meadow? How about a large sleeping dragon? Later a sign got put by the dragon, and the waking of the dragon became a major puzzle that threaded itself through the adventure with a number of different ways to wake him up, and so on. Next room over was the Bottomless Pit. And I did something in that room that I was probably unique for the time, and I did the first in-game advertising. I actually put a sign in there where in-game you ended up reading the sign and getting an advertisement for the next game in the series. That was added later on, once I had actually finished the first game, realized I enjoyed doing this. I was able to sell the first game and started my company just making these games, because I had a lot of people saying, oh, that was fun. We want another one. Okay, great. I'll go for it. My original computer that I got to write a game for was a bit slice computer that my brother invented. Basically, a bit slice computer back then was it would do operations in 4-bit chunks. So you put together 2, you have an 8-bit computer. You put together 4, you got a 16-bit computer. He literally built a 16-bit computer from these bit slice chips because he was a double E and he really enjoyed it. And I wrote a game for it. And this was real machine language. This was hand-coded down to the ones and zeros, binaries, but it was a little spacecraft would fly across the screen. You'd aim your mouse cursor at it. No mouse. You'd aim your gun at it and shoot them down. This was all text. There's no graphics. The next major thing that happened to me was the sphere computer, like a round globe sphere. It was an amazing invention. It's probably the second computer kit to come out. Most people think of the Altair MITs when coming out. That was an interesting concept. It was just a black box kit that people could build homebrew. The unique thing about the Sphere, though, was it was a fully integrated computer with a screen, a keyboard, and everything as part of the main machine. Anyway, I got that original kit, built it up. It didn't work. At the time, I was down on Antigua Island in the Caribbean, and fortunately there were a lot of techs down there. We worked on it together, got the thing running. What I ended up doing with that Sphere was I wrote a tank war game. I made a set of controllers that were basically a box with 2 rods that would go forward and back. They were spring-loaded wires inside so I'd know which way I was doing. They have a fire button on it. I remember seeing the original Zork. Once again, this was back on the DEC mainframe, back in the same place that I had seen the original Colossal Caves, and thought, wow, that was head and shoulders above Colossal Caves. The market we were targeting originally did not lend itself at all to the ability to do these bigger games. It wasn't until the Commodore 64 came out that the first mass market commercial machine with an affordable hard drive was really available. or something like that could be done. And that made our games more of a niche. Well, one thing with my adventures you might notice is they tended to be nonviolent, and the solutions were intended to be nonviolent. And I got a lot of later fan mail from people saying that because of that, it really brought the families together. They would play it together as a family. They felt it was good, wholesome entertainment, and that was kind of important to them. Whether it was something they didn't mind their kids playing, and they encouraged their kids to play. Whether it was helping them learn vocabulary or helping them to expand their thinking processes. One very touching email I got was with a now I can't remember if it was a man or a woman telling me that about their mother lying literally on her deathbed and wanting to replay adventure games with them together because it was such a good bonding time that they had when they were all younger, and it meant so much to them. That sort of things. And of all the things I get, that's one of the things that really humbles me, that I was able to help bring people together that way, which when I was writing the games certainly wasn't my intent. I was doing it because I was enjoying it. And that's literally why I was doing it. But my own I guess my values sort of rolled over into the games, in that I wanted it to be a friendly, nonviolent environment where you could learn to do things and have fun with it. We sold hint sheets for the games for $1 a piece back in the days of the company, and that was good money because they'd also have to pay the postage, shipping, and handling on top of it. Or we had a bargain for them, depending on how many games we had at the time. Like if all 12 were out, we'd have a hint book that had all 12 games for like $15. That would tie the whole thing together. Actually, no, it was $10. So there was some savings, and so we made at one point I was looking at sales. I think we were making more off the hint books than we were the games, and I think part of the problem was there was some pirating going on. People would take the games and copy them and give them to friends and give them to friends and give them to friends, but they'd buy their own hint book. And this was the early days of Xerox copying and everything, where it was kind of expensive to make personal copies of written materials. So that was kind of interesting.
Do you remember bumping into the term interactive fiction?
Of course, yeah. And that became popular after Adventure International was around. I have, for a while there, I would visit the internet news groups for internet fiction, interactive fiction. I still get the Magnus Opus newsletter that comes out. To be honest, I don't play the games. To me, the fun was in making interactive fiction. It was not in playing it. I really don't enjoy playing adventure games. I know it sounds odd, but that's not where my fun was. When I was at the time I was writing them, I tended to stay away from other people's games because I didn't want to get polluted by them and steal puzzles or anything else that came with it. So really, about the only adventure games I've ever played was Colossal Caves and the Zork. Zork 1 and 2 I think I played through. If you go look on the web, you'll find my original games are all over the place as free downloads. I don't mind people doing that. The only thing I sell today is that one new game I wrote in 2000, because that's something I deliberately wrote to sell and see, and I didn't have a big sell-through on it, but it was fun doing it, and it was fun giving the fans something that they asked for. Well, think about it. I mean, somebody had to invent calculus. I mean, before Sir Isaac Newton, there was no calculus, and now it's taught in schools. Did he invent calculus to teach in schools? No, he invented it because he was trying to solve a problem for himself. Right. And the same thing with this. Interactive fiction, I invented it because I was trying to solve a problem for myself, my interpreters. Right. I think what was unique that I brought in was the concept of the interpreter, because up to that point, the game, Colossal Caves, was a hand-coded, fixed game. So each person was working on the shoulders of the one that comes before him, and that's no different than anything else in our society and our civilization. I mean, this video camera that's filming it has gone through hundreds and hundreds of different generations. When you go back to the original hand crank movie that Edison made, that's where the roots are. Each one just improves and gets better and better. That's great. That's how we work as a society.